Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Corey Pierce, and I'm the Marketing Director here at Churn Zero, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar titled Surviving Stress in Customer Success. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that we are recording this session. A link to the recording will be available 24 hours after this webinar. Throughout the presentation, you're welcome to submit your questions via the Questions tab, and we'll try and answer them as we go. We will also address as many questions as we can during the Q&A portion of this webinar. Now, I'm pleased to introduce to you our presenter today, Ryan Johansen. Ryan is the Director of Customer Success at one of our customers, RapidMiner. In addition to being a CS leader, he's also a stress management guru. And with April being Stress Awareness Month, we were really excited to have Ryan share his advice on how customer success professionals can improve their mental states and lead happier and more productive lives. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Ryan. I'm really excited to see what you have to share with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Corey. I'm pumped to be here. Thank you and Churn Zero for having me today. Very thrilled to talk about this topic that's near and dear to my heart. And want to thank everyone for joining today and taking an hour out of your day. And honestly, thank yourself for taking a step to improve your own sort of mental health. So welcome, and we'll get into it. So Webster's dictionary defines stress as, okay, just kidding. But stress is a serious problem, and it's really the elephant in the room that not enough people, I think, are talking about. It's estimated that it costs American businesses $300 billion a year. About 83% of professionals report that they are stressed out because of work, which probably has increased as of lately. And only 40% of people will admit to their employers that they're stressed because of things like any stigma or being worried about people might think they're complainers or something like that. So in today's presentation, I want to make a really good cover of how you can use certain strategies to change your relationship with stress. It's really not removing stress completely is impossible, but I want to walk through how you can live with it a little bit better. So let's dive right into it. Be helpful if my slides move forward. Oops. Okay, so I want to start out with my story. You might be wondering why I got into this certain topic. And it wasn't because I thought it would be really cool or something like that. It's really based a lot off of my own story. So I've been in sales, customer success, account management for the past 10, 11 years. And in 2018, I found myself in sort of a difficult position. I actually received a promotion that I worked really hard for. I was leading my own team at a startup. I feel like I had arrived. And then the reality is that when you become a manager, you have a lot more problems to deal with. Your targets are bigger, there's more eyes on you, and there's a lot more pressure that comes with it. And there's a lot of things out of your control, which can create stress. So my old mentality of, work hard, keep your head down, more hours, give it your all, started to break down and fail. So I started getting miserable, I'm suffering from panic attacks, and even more than that, I'm start questioning my own ability. And every day started to feel like a challenge I couldn't overcome, and I started to feel hopeless. And I made the most humbling decision ever in my life. I decided to get some help. So I ended up actually looking at, mindfulness resorts and, beautiful places, but it got so bad and was so urgent that I ended up checking myself into a hospital for a couple of days because things got so serious. And that helped a lot. It was the most, difficult decision I ever made. There's a lot of shame involved with things like that, but looking back, I can say it was the best decision I've ever made and changed my life for the better. So that really helped, but I knew that I needed more after that. So as I left, I had one question really burning inside me of what can I do to feel better? So I read every book I could get my hands on. I took courses. I talked to other people who have dealt with this before. And, I was determined to come back stronger than ever. And what I've discovered is that we're really more in control of our mental state than we might believe. And there's a lot of scientifically validated techniques that can reduce your stress that are relatively simple and free and easy to use in your daily life. And the most interesting thing I've found out and come to realize is that by putting your mental health first, it can actually lead to you being more productive and getting better results. So I probably work less hours now, but over the past few years, I was able to exceed our revenue targets. I got promoted again. I've been able to build a really fun passion project to share my experience and hopefully help a few other people out. So really appreciate you joining today, and let's get right into it. So first of all, stress is deeply individual. So certain things like the way that you're wired, so your temperament or things like that, Obviously, everyone has different sort of personalities going on. Maybe you're more introverted or extroverted. All those types of factors can play into not only what stresses you out, but how much stress you might feel. So certain things like genetics, are you predisposed to things like that? So that can make more challenges as well. And everyone handles stress differently. So the techniques I want to share today are really kind of a shotgun approach where I'll share a lot of different things that might be helpful. So keep an open mind and try a couple of them if they're helpful. And another thing too that's going to shape your impact on stress is, how you think about it or situations you faced in the past. Nobody escapes from life without any sort of challenges or issues. So it's very important to take into account, why something stressing you out might be related to your past. A little deep, but let's keep moving along. And then also your current life events can play a huge role. If something normally wouldn't stress you out at all, but suddenly that you're, coming in from, a very difficult time at home, you go into work and it can seem really difficult to get through the day. So that's another thing to keep in mind as you, think about your relationship with stress. Speaking of that, really the first place that we want to address when we're trying to create a better balance and understanding of stress is changing our relationship with it. Stress doesn't have to be a bad word. It's very important. It can have consequences, but it does serve certain purposes. So the best way to change your relationship is to understand it a little better. So stress is the body's response to a threat that's either real or imagined. So as a CSM, you might get an email that says, I'm going to churn, something like that could stress you out. Or there's other things like someone cuts you off in traffic and you might, feel a little nervous. And what the stress response is, it is a survival mechanism that basically pumps your heart rate, it fills your body with oxygen, your muscles tighten, you get chemicals like adrenaline and cortisol that serve an important purpose. And to understand this, you want to go back to what was called the fight or flight that many of our prehistoric ancestors developed in order to survive. So stress in its purest essence is a survival mechanism to protect you from danger. However, that danger isn't always as real, but it can be sometimes imagined, which is more problematic. So this is really what has helped us survive, and our brains are hardwired to seek out threats, which is going to be a constant theme in this presentation to try and change some of your thought patterns around that. But ultimately, the stress response got us to where we are. These folks lived in caves. Life was ridiculously difficult. There were saber-toothed tigers that could attack you. So that response ultimately helped them either fight off a predator or run away from it and survive and get to where we are today. Speaking of where we are today, life is comparatively cushy. We have, air conditioning. Most of us work inside, comfortable mattresses. There's every food you could get delivered to your door. You can watch TV for millennia. Some might say we have it comparatively cushy to our, ancestors from back then. But the issue is we still have the same fight or flight issues that would fight off a saber-toothed tiger. So that can obviously be problematic. So we want to look to that a little bit. So the first strategy that can be very helpful is trying not to struggle with it. So the way that you can do that is with a technique called labeling. So as you feel yourself getting stressed out, maybe your heart starts pumping, or you get a little bit nervous, or however you typically manifest it in your body, you want to remind yourself that is stress. And what that does is make you focus on the stressor and not the stress. So that's usually where a lot of challenges come. And another thing is stress means that you care. So if you get an email saying about, a customer complaining, that's maybe why you tighten up, because, you very badly want that to go right. So it can help you take the right actions if used correctly. Another way to think about stress is treat it like a bodily function. You might get nervous about the stress response, and that leads to more stress, and you're constantly getting worse with it. If you can have a little observation and treat it like a bodily function, you wouldn't get upset with yourself if you start to feel hungry and your stomach starts rumbling before lunch. It's really a part of life that you can sort of deal with if you have the right mentality around it. And the next thing is observing stress versus thinking about it. So the way to do that is, as you feel stress, just notice how it manifests in your body. So you might just start to notice your heart rate or challenges like that, rather than thinking, oh my God, that's stress, I'm screwed, everything's gonna go bad. And then you can see how that snowballs and gets worse. So the takeaway here is, it's not the stress itself that's gonna cause the problems. It's how tightly you grip with those ideas about that stress response. Another helpful technique to manage your relationship with stress is trying to live more in the present moment. So as CSMs, I'm sure all of us can relate to this. How often do you sit in a meeting thinking about your next meeting, thinking about your last meeting, maybe doing a couple emails, responding to Slack, a lot of different things. So as you're in multiple different places, that makes you stress out a little bit more. So a good way to ground yourself a little bit that's very simple to do is if you just press your feet into the ground and wiggle your toes and just say, be where my feet are. And then try and bring your attention back to what you're actually doing. And by doing that, you get three major benefits. So the first is that you're bringing your full attention to a task and you feel like you're able to do your best work. And I'm sure we can all relate of when you've been on a really engaging call or working on a great presentation, you start to really feel in the zone and then time flies by. That's because you're living in the present moment and you really don't feel stressed and you feel a lot better. The second benefit is that when you're in the present moment, you're not stressed out about the present or future, which is a major cause of stress for a lot of people. And the third is by living in the present moment, you start to enjoy life more and remove the worry. Which, how many times can you think of if you've maybe been on vacation or at a child's soccer game and you're, looking at your email or worrying about something else you have to do or, how much, that project's going to be. It can start to make you, the more you do that, the more you're going to enjoy your life because, we only have one shot at this. So another thing to think about with stress is that most people might at the outset say, I wish I didn't have stress at all, but that's really not where you want to be because the opposite of stress isn't anti-stress, it's boredom, which I'm sure a few of us might have had other jobs in our past or done things where you are just, absolutely bored. The time goes by so slow, and that can be painful in its own way. So it's important when we're thinking about this to find a good balance between a little bit of stress and the right skills to deal with it. And that makes that flow channel where you're really engaged and you're excited about the work you're doing. So stress can be helpful. And another thing about that is say that, anytime I've taken a new job or, feeling like I have a new, obstacle to take on, at first I might feel really concerned and anxious and think, oh my God, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this. This is way too much. But usually sooner than later, you're able to get through it and you feel a lot more accomplished about being able to do that. So next time you're feeling like that, remind yourself of a situation when you overcame a similar challenge or another challenge and give your brain some evidence on, hey, this is something that I can overcome. So a recap on just your relationship with stress, the first thing I'd recommend is try and be more present. I totally understand it's easier said than done, but practice makes perfect. The second is to stop struggling and try and use stress to your benefit. And the third is try and use stress to your advantage as well. So as CSMs, I would imagine most of us have very stressful workloads. CS teams can be notoriously understaffed. Some of us might have hundreds, if not thousands of customers. You're constantly on meetings. You have all these different emails. Your sales team's asking you about an upsell. Your marketing team is asking for a case study. It can feel like a lot of pressure. And from what I've talked to about other people, it feels like you're constantly treading water, which can lead you to burnout and feeling pretty bad. So we want to talk through a couple of good ideas on how you can prevent this and get a little bit ahead with your workload. So I'm sure a lot of us can resonate to, feeling like this most days. So I'm sure a few of you might have had a certain day where you feel like you're working hard, but nothing's getting accomplished. And one of the biggest threats to accomplishing things is the practice of multitasking. And I know some people are probably even multitasking right now, and it's a necessary evil in our world, but I would propose eliminating it where you can. And I do have a strategy on how to do that. But just a quick word on the actual kind of dangers of multitasking and some of the consequences is these numbers are very important. So 15 represents in studies that it can lower your IQ by as much as 15%. So that's the equivalent of not sleeping the night before. And the 40% is your increase in stress. As you're taking on more projects, you might feel really overwhelmed. So I want to walk through a different way to approach it. So I know that eliminating multitasking is impossible and that's a tall order. But one of the practices I like to do personally is give myself, I've taken this from the book Deep Work, is give myself a 90-minute chunk of distraction-free work. And I get up early in the morning and and I try and do this. If you're just getting started out and you want to try this, maybe start with 30 minutes and work your way up. The reason for 90 minutes is based off this ultradian performance rhythm. So as you can see, you have about 90 minutes where your brain is going to be in good function, but after a while, your returns start to diminish. You get more stressed out. And that's when your brain starts tapping you on the shoulder and be like, yeah, let's check out Reddit. Come on, like there's other things we can do. This is boring. So you can kind of hack that and just as you get off of that 90 minutes, move on to something that might be, answering a couple emails or getting back to people. When I do this, I like to pause alerts, shut off my internet if I can, so no one can bother me, so I can really get the work done. I usually try and do this before anyone's up. And then also to make this work, have what you want to do lined up. So if you have this chunk of time and you write down, like say I want to, help build a, new workflow in Churn Zero, shout out. I'd sit down and have that kind of built out in my head and know what I want to do rather than sit down and say, well, what do I want to do that's productive? That can take me about a half hour to think of if I don't have it lined up. So to move on to scheduling your time, a great quote is that if you don't prioritize your time, somebody else will. And as customer success managers, your time is the most important resource you have, and it is constantly at attention. So what I'd recommend here is certain blocks for certain tasks. So I try and block out my calendar. If there's things I'm repeatedly doing, on a daily basis, is try and chunk those together, which can be very helpful. But the other thing with a schedule is carve out some planned downtime. I like to hit the gym or go for a walk, and I'll just put that on my calendar so no one else can really seep into that. The other thing when you're thinking about scheduling is optimizing it to fit your strengths. Are you an early bird? Are you a night owl? If so, try and get your most important tasks done in that time frame when you're not getting, bothered by other people. And when you're scheduling your best practices, don't overdo it. You might get that temptation to put all of these things you're going to accomplish in a day. Maybe you last a couple days, maybe a couple weeks, but sooner or later you burn out, you're overworking yourself, and then you're back to square one and you feel like you failed. So I'd recommend if, something you can immediately take out of this is set up a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour of kind of that focused work time to really drive important initiatives forward. Another strategy I can't emphasize enough is asking for help. More often than not, everybody wants to see you succeed. And we're only human, we want to get things done on our own, but you can get a lot of benefits from asking for help. Do you ever feel better when you're venting to a coworker about a situation, and then all of a sudden you feel a little bit more comfortable, your shoulders go down and you feel good? There's also another evolutionary reason for that is because we developed what's called the tend and befriend response, which is, around the same time as fight or flight, where humans had to make existing partnerships to make sure they could survive. So we would hunt together, share together, and then fight off predators. So that is still deeply wired with us. And with COVID, a lot of people are isolated, so a lot of challenges are going up. So make sure you're even just talking to your team, even if you don't need help. Just ask if other people need help. It's extremely helpful. If you feel like you're having a bad day, help someone out that's having a worse day. It'll really change your perspective on how lucky you might be. So I'd encourage people to get support where you need to, whether that be from your manager, a team member, your coach, really, a medical professional, anyone that you need it, don't be afraid to ask for it. It can really change your life. And the other thing about asking for help is that you gain a new perspective. So when you're dealing with a situation, you might be really emotionally attached to it. That person isn't as involved, so they'll have distance from the situation, which allows them to have really a non-biased reaction and probably give you some fairly good advice. And another thing, if you're maybe a brand new CSM to your company and you don't know how your team members are able to keep up with it, take them out for a coffee or, give them a call and see how they do it. When I was first managing, I would take, anyone who would give me the time, I would sit down with them and ask them questions. So I would avoid some of the mistakes they made or run things by them to see if I'm making sense. And more importantly, by asking for help, people will often tell you of struggles they've gone through, so you feel, confident you can overcome it and learn their strategies. Objectivity is extremely important with stress management or productivity. So our brains are not good at remembering everything. It's a terrible system of record, but many of us, when we're really busy, tend to rely on it. So what this does, it creates this burden on you subconsciously where, each thing that's added starts to weigh you down and feel like more work. And subconsciously, that might make you go into avoidance or start to have some of the negative coping things like just avoiding things outright or procrastinating or starting to get more anxious about your workload. So, when you do this, you also think about work all the time. That's why you might be on the couch thinking you're watching a movie with your significant other, and then you think, oh no, I forgot to email that person. So to get out of that habit, I'd recommend writing things down, and I'll walk through an exercise of how you can do this. But just as simple as a to-do list or in your, Churn Zero task menu, which is extremely helpful. Shout out again. But I swear they're not paying me. It's a poor system of organization as well. So objectivity, a good exercise with this is, say you're dealing with a challenging situation, and I'd encourage you to just, try this anytime you're feeling, difficult or struggling, is write down as much as you need to about what you're worrying about and be as detailed as possible. Get those thoughts out of your head, because once it's out of your head, it can't kind of snowball. You kind of stop it in its tracks and you can look at it objectively. So after you've written it out and you understand the problem, you can write, what can I do about it? Perhaps it's something you've dealt with before but haven't thought of it this way, or perhaps it's something you have zero control over, so you might want to just let it go. And then the third thing, once you've figured out all the possible approaches you can take, figure out what's the best one and maybe an option B, and then write what you're going to do about it. And then number 4, a plan without action is pretty useless, so figure out, what am I going to start? So if you take the 5 to 10 minutes to go through this exercise, you're going to have a lot more confidence to go through a lot of your challenges and face them head on. And as you do this, you get more comfortable with taking on more, challenges and stress. Another thing I can't emphasize enough is mental recovery. I am not a big fan of the, hustle culture. You got to be up at 3 in the morning and, work 95 hours. It's terrible. It's unhealthy, and more often than not, it's just not effective. So there are numerous studies where people working over 50 hours a week start to get less returns. And if you think of a Olympic sprinter, they're not sprinting 9 hours a day every day. That's how they get hurt. That's how they get burnt out. So it's important to have some type of a recovery routine, or else you're willing to be more burned out, or you start getting tired and you can't focus anymore. So you just want to make sure you're using your brain optimally. And a way to do that is make sure you're taking time off. Americans aren't very good about this, but this is something I highly encourage my team to do, especially times are tough right now. So the more that you're out, you can recharge. And the benefit of that is you might think of solutions to problems when you have a little distance from them. Another good way where the lines right now are more blurred than ever between work and personal lives is having a shutdown routine. So say the end of your day, you're, usually burned out, and then you go to something else, and then you have to keep checking your email and scrolling with it. Try and shut down your computer, and at the end of the day, either you go for a walk with someone, or you call a friend, or cook your favorite meal. Just have yourself something to look forward to. And I know it's a little difficult with the activities people can do nowadays, but try and keep doing enjoyable things. If you make your life all about work, your mood is 100% going to be based on how work goes. And in any professional career, we have ups and downs. So you want to hedge your bets and have some enjoyable things. Some things I like to do is, go for a walk in the woods. I like to play hockey, and I don't think about work at all. And that's a very important part to my own recovery. So to recap the stress from workload piece, avoid multitasking, where you can. So I'd recommend start with an hour a day. That's 5 hours a week. You will be amazed with what you can do. And take that hour and schedule the time, and make sure you protect that, and you know what you're going to do, and you will be amazed with what you can accomplish in a short amount of time. Make sure you ask for help. There's no shame in it, and people, unless they're monsters, want to see you do well. Make sure you're using objectivity. What that does is really get problems out of our head and lets us address them, with a little bit more, understanding than if we do it a little bit more emotionally. And just make sure you're taking time off and recovering. And one of my favorite topics, stress from people. So in CS, you 100% are dealing with a ton of different people. People are unpredictable, sometimes irrational, and we're all wired extremely differently. We're all going after different goals. So there's notoriously a lot of conflict and challenges there. So I want to dive into some strategies on how you can reduce your stress that comes from other people, and possibly how you can reduce the stress you might put onto other people. The first thing that I'd recommend is, in CS, we want to avoid as many toxic relationships as possible. And the best way to do this is through boundary setting. And I'm a firm believer that people treat you the way that you let them treat you. So if we can all think of a time that, I'm sure it's notorious, that a customer might have ghosted you, the earlier you set that boundary, the easier they are to keep. If if you let them do that once and you don't really kind of call them out in a respectful manner, they might keep walking all over you and not treat your time with any respect. The other issue here is, seeking a partnership, not subservience. We work with customers, and one thing I try and tell my team is that treat yourself like a personal trainer. You have to make sure that your customers are getting to their goals. You might have to have some tough conversations to make sure you're pushing them forward with their best interest in mind. That same goes for any internal relationship too. I've seen, CS and sales notoriously has sort of a rivalry, but it's very important to align on where you guys are going to be in common and how you can work together, because at the end of the day, everyone is on the same team. Another challenge that a lot of CSMs might run into is where, we're nice people, we want to make people happy. So a lot of people will say yes to a lot of things, but then after you say that yes, you might resent that you said that. So anytime you do say yes, it is a note of something else. You have a finite amount of time. So one thing is, next time someone asks you to do something that you don't 100% feel, that might be a little bit extra of an ask, to say, yep, happy to consider that. Can I get back to you tomorrow? That gives you a little bit of space to think about something logically or how you can best address that. And if someone's making you make a decision on the spot about giving up your time, that's also an unhealthy situation which you want to address. This doesn't come easy for everyone, but I would say start with a lower stakes situation and work your way up from there. For me, I practice this with, I used to take the MBTA in Boston every day, and my biggest pet peeve is when people listen to their phone loudly or have games going on. So the way that I was able to start having more of those conversations is just saying, hey, can you please turn the phone down for me? So that was a very low stakes situation. I'd never see that person again. So that has helped me tremendously, and now I can work my way up, and there's really no issues with that anymore. So the method to setting boundaries and achieving a lot more in personal relationships is through assertive communication. So this is very helpful because it removes ambiguity. There's a lot that gets lost in translation. People can understand things in different ways. You might assume what someone means, but they don't mean that at all. So I'll give an example of the indirect communication. So if my coworker is playing the radio loud back when we were in offices, I'd say, hey Milton, maybe I'm sensitive, but could you maybe turn down the radio? And no worries, if you don't mind, but maybe other people think it's loud. So the challenge with that is that you're using words like maybe, could you just, it's not me, maybe someone else cares about it. You're not letting them know. And until people understand where you're coming from, that people aren't mind readers. So that's going to inevitably lead to some conflict. And the direct method doesn't mean that you have to scream at them or something like that. It's taking a respectful tone and being really clear and upfront and saying, hey, Milton, I know you like to listen to the radio, but could you please turn it down for me because I can't concentrate right now. And that is simple. You're respectful and you're just being honest about it. And the way for this to work is to be okay with it when someone might talk to you that way and not take things personally. So what this does, effectively within teams, from what I've noticed, is it helps avoid resentment. Sometimes you get, in a conflict with someone else and you don't bring it up. And a great analogy I've heard is, conflicts between team members can be, like sitting basically, at a kitchen table and there's trash piled up and you're pretending it's not there. So by doing this, you can avoid some of that resentment and start to regrow that relationship. This creates a lot of win-win situations too, where you're really being direct and clear and getting on the same page, and it helps strengthen teams. Another thing is it helps you earn respect. So, sometimes I've, had to call customers out over some difficult things, and they'll tell me, you know what, that wasn't okay for me to do. I'm sorry about that. And, they didn't get upset with me. It actually improves the relationship sometimes. But like I said, you have to be respectful and allow people to do it to you as well for this to be really effective. So going back to conflict, not everybody loves it, but it's a necessary evil in the workplace. People have different motivations. We're wired differently. So, going back to that trash situation, you don't want to ignore conflict because typically it's not going to go away. So the quicker you address it, if you think of, actually having that conversation, it might be painful at first and, very I call it a temporary discomfort, but if you just let that go on, it's going to get much worse. And then what started as something small can be something really challenging and hard to overcome. Another thing too is where we're living, a lot of email communication, things get lost in context. If you have to have a difficult conversation, is just take something offline. Make sure you're calling someone, explain with them. And then, the other thing too is the 20-minute rule for if you get a difficult email with someone and you get really annoyed and you want to respond. I typically wait for 20 minutes and just say, okay, why don't I think of a bit more positive way to respond to this and let myself cool off and go for a walk. And I've probably saved my career thousands of times over from just relaxing. And I tend to make a situation better because as you meet aggression with aggression, it's not going to be a pretty picture. So importantly is to be calm. And if you're having those difficult conversations, a good way to unarm someone, which, it takes a lot of courage to do, is just start off with, hey, is there anything I'm doing wrong that is bothering you? And then you open the door to a really positive conversation that moves the needle. So another way to exercise this, if say you're really annoyed with a coworker or any situation, is once again, write it down and get some objectivity around it. And you want to see the other side of the scenario. So I might write, what am I upset about? Dean didn't tell me that an account was upselling. Why am I upset about it? I should know everything. He's withholding information. He's a jerk. He wants to make me look bad. He's the worst. And then I can sit down and write, okay, what part did I have in it? And this is uncomfortable to be really honest with yourself and have that self-awareness, but you can look through it and say, well, I don't always tell him everything that's going on because I can get busy and I don't mean anything negative by it. So that might cool you down a little bit before you have kind of a difficult conversation. Another thing that I like to remind people of, and this is one of my favorite quotes ever, is be kind. For everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. So a lot of us go through personal challenges and we don't feel like sharing it at work, which is totally normal because it's not everyone else's business. But sometimes you might have a coworker drop the ball that you'll get upset with, or maybe a customer just absolutely reams you out for no reason. You want to kind of think of it as maybe they're going through something tough, and I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. If someone habitually abuses you, that's a different story, but try giving people the benefit of the doubt. And 99% of the time, people are doing their best. There are obviously some monsters out there, but something to think through. So in handling stress from people, the first thing I want to talk through is, just make sure you're setting the boundaries with people. Be honest and be upfront, and make sure you're protecting, what's yours. The second is the assertive communication. So make sure you practice this. It doesn't come super easily, but the alternative is what you've been doing now, and maybe that's not working out. And lastly, try and have some compassion for people, because sometimes you're going to need it from someone else if something happens in your life. And last but not least, I want to talk through 4 different techniques to handle 4 difficult emotions that can arise from stressful situations. So this is very similar to all of our lives. If you feel really overwhelmed, you can't concentrate, you have too much to do, not enough time to do it. This is absolutely ridiculous. How can people expect me to do this? I'm going to lose it. I need to quit. I'm going to start selling snow cones by a beach somewhere. CS isn't for me. I would recommend trying out meditation. It's gotten a lot of good press, especially recently. I've been doing it for about 5 years, and it's really improved my life. But meditation, if you have no experience with it, it's just simply a group of techniques that help you encourage a heightened sense of awareness and attention. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. There's things like, the kind of standard breathing meditations. There's also mindful eating or mindful walking. And it's proven through a lot of clinical studies to be a very effective intervention for things like depression, anxiety, chronic pain, and many other cases. It's taught at about 7,000 hospitals. So the way that you can meditate, if you've never done it before, is it's very simple. You don't need, chimes or robes or some fancy mountaintop or something like that. Is you just set a timer for 1 minute. You shut your eyes and you breathe in for 4 seconds. Then you hold your breath for 4 seconds and then breathe out for 4 seconds. And you just pay attention to that sensation in your breath. And the point isn't to stop your thoughts at all. You just want to be more aware of them. And there's a lot of benefits to doing this. So what meditation does is it activates your parasympathetic nervous system, and that's known as the rest and digest system. So what that does is it's associated with things like, going to sleep or having food or having sex. So it's basically starts to relax you. So as you meditate more and more, don't do it to, you think that you're going to do it for 10 minutes and life's going to be all better. It takes practice, but the more you practice it, the more results you start to get, kind of like, working out or anything like that. So it helps you reduce your stress levels so you can focus a little bit more. It also increases your concentration and ability to do that. So by just listening to your breath and trying to identify any of the outside noises and quiet those down, you start to train your brain to be able to really focus on a situation, which can be very helpful, as a lot of us are pulled in a lot of different ways. We're on our phones all the time. So it's a very helpful practice to check out. And it helps you identify the patterns that can lead to stress. So this is extremely helpful because, as I got to talking earlier, is if you're observing stress, you start to notice, hey, oh my God, this is what stressed me out, and this is something I can do about it. And next time I get stressed because of this, or I can avoid this situation. So it helps you kind of plan and figure out what stresses you out, so you can make adequate changes to your life or have a better plan going into stressful situations. Now, this is yours truly at about 4 years old. I was upset because I didn't get the laser background, maybe. I was a early 90s kid. So with this, if you're feeling absolutely miserable, you're upset about things going on, nothing's going your way lately, you're having a rough spell, you're kind of questioning your own ability, I would look to practice gratitude. Gratitude is extremely simple, and it's just the practice of being thankful for what you have. So the way to do this is to, when you wake up or go to bed, is you just write 3 things down that you're grateful for. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy like, oh my God, I bought a Ferrari, life's killing it, I'm married a supermodel. It can be as simple as I have a job, I have a roof over my head, and the weather was nice today. And to do this really well, you want to do it for about a month and just keep picking new things. And why do we do this, and how does it work? So if you think of, if you've ever tried to look at a new car or a new phone, new shoes or anything like that, you went out and you checked it out, and then when you start going out, you notice that that car or that phone is everywhere. And it's not that it became super popular overnight, it's that you effectively trained your brain to notice it. And that's exactly how gratitude works. And that can also improve your happiness levels, because if we go back to thinking about buying a new phone or something like that, a lot of us fall in the trap of what's known as the hedonic treadmill, which that's when you keep telling yourself, I'll be happy when this, I'll be happy when this. And the challenge there is, say, we'll go back to the phone example of, oh, this phone stinks, it only has 15 megapixels, and I need 30 megapixels to take a good picture, and this is crappy, and I'm miserable. And then you get the phone, and then you're pumped, and then it wears off. So with gratitude, that changes your happiness baseline, that you're living a much more positive and happy life. So it's definitely something to check out that's ridiculously simple to implement. The next topic I want to cover is, let's say that you're dealing with a ton of negative thoughts. It is totally normal. They say we have about 60,000 thoughts a day. And if you go back to what I talked about with our brains being trained to find negative, a lot of them are negative. And thoughts don't always necessarily reflect truth. So a practice you can use for this is cognitive diffusion. And it's very simple. Cognitive diffusion is developed from acceptance and commitment therapy, which that is based off of mindfulness. It's extremely popular. There's some good books about it I'm happy to recommend. But basically, it allows you to gain objectivity around your thoughts. Similarly, how we were writing down certain things that stressed us out, it just lets you think about your thoughts in a different way. So instead of thinking of your thoughts of true and false, think of them as helpful or unhelpful, which is totally realistic and helpful. And you'll notice some of those stories you start to tell yourself. And if you're particularly beating yourself up and tough on yourself, I am guilty of it as well. Just ask yourself, would I be friends with someone who talked to me like I treat myself? So if that's the case, give yourself a break. We always say the expression, you're only human, but if, we're in that situation, we might not agree with it sometimes. So keep that in mind. So let's practice cognitive diffusion very quickly. So you start out with a thought that pops in your head like all the time, something like, I'm a failure. So I'm a failure. I let that customer churn. It's all my fault. I'm the worst CSM on the team. I'm going to get fired. I'm going to live under a bridge. Life stinks. This sucks. You just add in, I'm having the thought that I'm a failure. So this gives you a little space between that thought and what's currently going on. So when you add that in, you get a little bit more objectivity, and it allows you to kind of test that with some other evidence of, okay, maybe I'm a failure, but that's the only customer I've lost all year, so maybe that's not exactly the case. I guess maybe it is just a thought and it's not 100% the truth. And another thing you can add on to that is thanks brain, or tell yourself, you know what, this is just the story I'm telling myself that I'm a failure. I'm not really a failure. So give that a shot. It's a little kind of quirky, but if you keep practicing it, it will show some decent results. And last and not least, anger. It happens to the best of us. Everyone has a different way of expressing it, but it's a very toxic emotion, which can lead to very difficult health problems. And if you're really pissed off lately, or you want to scream someone out or something like that, I want you to practice a technique known as acceptance. So a good motto of life is try and control what you can control. And if something doesn't go your way, you can ask yourself, did I actually have control over this? Or what can I do about it? And if the answer is nothing, you kind of have to move on and find something you can work on. So the benefit to the acceptance is it allows you to focus on more solutions instead of just dwelling on the problem repeatedly. And that feeling of not being in control is what creates a lot of pain and struggle. So this is a very effective way to handle that. So acceptance, the important thing here is acceptance doesn't mean you like something. If you think of an example like, say you hop on a plane and there's a crying baby, you're not going to be thrilled about that, but you're also not going to scream until it stops either. So a good way to practice this is to just pretend you're giving advice to a friend dealing with the same situation. That gives you a little bit of objective distance from that situation. You can think about it a little less emotionally. So just to recap on those sort of feelings, if you're overwhelmed, meditation is extremely helpful. If you're miserable, keep your gratitude practice going. 3 things a day for 30 days. It will change your life. Negative thoughts, cognitive diffusion is very helpful with that. And if you're really angry, try acceptance. That it's difficult, but it will work if you give it a shot. So with that, you are all cured. You're welcome. I'm very happy. But that's obviously a little tongue-in-cheek, but I really appreciate everyone's time today. And going forward, I really hope you found some value here and there's things you can take away. Everything is fairly simple, and you need to practice these things to see results. Stress management's a lot like losing weight or giving up smoking. You don't do it for 3 weeks and then you're all good. There's you have to develop somewhat of a routine, but if you spend, I swear, like 10 to 15 minutes, you will see some pretty good benefits in your life. Another thing I'd recommend is it's okay to ask for help. If that is something you need, don't be afraid if you're having more serious problems than just work stress. And remember that you have more control than you might believe. There's a lot of techniques to kind of think about your thoughts differently or reduce your stress. The next is to keep an open mind. A lot of these techniques might seem uncomfortable at first, but a good thing I like to say is that if you keep doing what you've always done, you're going to keep getting those same results. So find what works for you and keep practicing it often. Please add me on LinkedIn. I'd love to talk. This is a very important topic to me, and I'm always as open as I can be to help anyone else out dealing with stuff like this. I also have a website if you want to check it out. I do other talks like this and have a course and things like that. And last but not least, I am hiring for a CSM. So if you are familiar with the analytics space, definitely let me know. So that wraps up my presentation, and thank you all so much. And we can probably do some questions now.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, that was a great presentation. And something that I was taking notes, and I'm looking forward to going through this recording again. And I think that as we're coming up, or we've reached the year mark of being in this pandemic, it's stressful. There's no doubt about that. And so like dealing with work and home and everything, it becomes a lot. So there's a lot that we can all work on individually and professionally with this. So these are some great tips. I'd like to invite the audience to go ahead and submit their questions. We have gotten some during while you're going through your slides. So I will get started with the ones that have already come in. So someone asked if you could share some of the books that you read that helped you.
Yeah, there's a bunch. So the happiness trap is when I talked about cognitive diffusion. That's a really good one that takes a very different approach to how we look at stress. Another one is The Upside of Stress by Kelly McGonigal. She talks a lot about some of the positive aspects of stress and how labeling it as a negative thing when it's something that commonly occurs can be problematic, and that can lead to a lot of challenges. On the productivity thing, which I know I mentioned a lot of that, but I think they can go hand in hand. If you're not spending time stressed out, you can get more done. Is a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. That book changed my life. So that's another one where, that talks about, the almost tyranny of email and things like that. So reducing how much time you're on a screen can make massive impacts. Another one is Getting Things Done by David Green, but I'm happy to kind of share anything if you want to reach out.
Awesome. Those are some great recommendations. Our next question, and I think this is something that probably we've all kind of dealt with. Do you have any tactics for how to manage the new Slack and Teams instant message work culture that is expected at your organization, and how to not get overwhelmed?
Yeah, I'm like the most anti-Slack Teams person ever. It's a necessary evil. So the first thing I think plays into what I talked about earlier is give yourself that focused hour to actually get some things done. But, I think in the book, Cal Newport actually mentioned it too, but set expectations with the people that you work with. My manager was cool about it, but at first I sat him down and I was like, listen, like this is absolutely killing me. I'm not getting as much done. So what I want to do is offer more value to the company, and I can't do that if I'm responding to stupid things that people ask me. So it's just, if you're setting expectations, maybe not that rude, but I'd just say set expectations as of, typically I have an off period between 10 and 12 or something like that. So, people understand, so they don't freak out when you don't answer. So the more you set that up and people understand it and be really clear about that, sometimes you might get pushed back and people call you a weirdo, but it's worked for me so far.
Okay, I think that's good advice. We have a question that came in that says, how could you support a friend or a coworker that is exhibiting signs of extreme stress at work? What's an okay way to broach the topic with them?
Yeah, that's a very challenging subject, where everyone is wired differently. Some people are more kind of, I know in my past I was, I really kind of took it internal. Other people will be a little bit more external. But I would just say, I think the more important, what a lot of people might shy away from is when you tell someone you have to do this, and really attack them. So I would say, one thing that really helped me out personally is hearing of other people who've overcome it. That gave me a little positivity. And another thing is if you can just say, hey, it seems like you're having a hard time. I want you to know that, I care about you and I'm here for you if there's anything I can do. Because, when you get in a state like that and someone's really frazzled and burned out, it's extremely hard for them to take that first step sometimes. So if there's, I think just being there for someone is a huge thing.
Awesome. A kind of related question. As a customer success leader, how do you go about gauging your team stress level? Should you just outright ask them, or is there a different way to elicit the information to get a truthful response?
Yeah, it's difficult because, like I said, 4 in 10 people actually talk about it. I tend to play the cards really close to the chest with my boss sometimes. I don't know why. It's just, how some people are wired. But I think a good technique is you just say, hey, how are you doing? And they'll say, fine. And then you say, how are you doing? And just, maybe ask them 3 times. And usually by that, maybe they'll start to open it up. But I think I try and be really honest with my story and how things have gone, so that plays. But I think if you show a little vulnerability about, it's totally normal and other people deal with it, so I'm here for you, and just have that compassion, that might help. But I'm still trying to find the perfect answer as well.
Yeah, I think I think your advice there is right. But yeah, like caring for your team and the people and saying something, it can be sensitive, but at least letting them know you're there, I think, is a good place to start. Um, our next question is, do you have any tips for managing email and not letting it overrun your entire day?
Yeah, it's really brutal. So that's something that I try to attack pretty head on. I think another thing, I didn't mention it in the presentation, but I usually try to in a lot of other ones, is starting your day with email is the worst thing you can do, because there's a couple reasons. There's a psychological reason why we go to email, because it's basically, there's all these pretty alerts and colors and some of them make sounds. So, that basically calls, I think it's called the lottery brain. So it's built up. So you keep scrolling, hoping you're going to get something cool. And in work email, you rarely do. So what I would do is, obviously that's a tough pattern to hack, but I try and get at least, I don't check my email until a certain time in the day. I might shut it off for like an hour. So if you take those mini breaks, that can be really effective. But if you just, if you're responding to everything, it's just going to be impossible to catch up with. So I think, it's a necessary evil, but the more you can kind of, I try and shut off all my alerts too. Like I'll let emails come up, but if you can, usually they might play like a sound or there's a color or something like that, make that as non-appetizing as possible. So if you don't have that there, it's not going to make your brain quickly look at it and then dive into that application. Same thing with my iPhone. I keep that on grayscale, so it's not as good to look at. I don't have any notifications on my phone. Like it's Fort Knox. I try and these things hack your brain a little bit, so it's very tough, and people call me a weirdo for it, but it's effective.
I think those are some good tips. We have a question that came in that says, any specific tips for those of us who are not thriving in this work from home environment?
Ooh, that's tough. So I think that's a tough question. I mean, I think with me, we have some of those like virtual happy hours and stuff like that, and the virtual meetups, which it's even more time on Zoom. So that's something that like you're gonna be kidding me. Like I'm so burnt out on this. I would try and do that if you can with team members, but like human interaction can be really helpful. But I think what you want to, like, one thing I might recommend to do, and everyone's wired really differently. Like me personally, I love working from home. Like I don't get many distractions, so it's tough for me to give a great answer here. But I would try and have some type of system where you can find how you best work and try different things, or maybe read about what other people have done in this topic, because I don't have the best answer there, but I would probably go along the lines of something like that. So sorry I couldn't be more helpful there. I'm team stay at home forever.
I know it is like, I mean, with everything, a balance of finding finding the right balance there. Let's see. We have a question that says, how can I go about approaching my boss to letting him know I'm feeling overwhelmed without having it affect his opinion of me?
That's a really good question. I opened up about my experience. I went into my boss's office like almost full breakdown and told him, and I had the same exact fear. And it ultimately led to like he was extremely cool about it, and we have a very good relationship still. So more often than not, like your leaders should want you to succeed. And if anyone gives you a hard time about anything like that, it's really that speaks to the culture of your organization, and maybe think that through a little bit. But yeah, I would say you're going to have to be honest, or else it's going to get worse. It can be really difficult, but maybe be a little bit more subtle about it at first if that's not getting through. But I think you kind of have to be a little honest with where you're at, because one thing, when I manage, I don't know exactly where people are at, and the feedback I give my team is like, I'm not going to catch every cue, so just hit me over the head with a frying pan with like whatever you need from me, and I can help you. So it goes back to kind of like, people aren't mind readers, so maybe they don't know. But I would just try and have an honest conversation. It's not the easiest answer, but it should be effective.
I think that's good advice. Let's see, what other questions do we have? And there's a lot of questions I'm trying to read through, by the way. So let's see. How do you suggest handling the challenge of having the company culture being part of the stress? So for example, a company that doesn't encourage employees to take time off, and having to attend meetings all the time. I guess a company culture.
Yeah, I mean, culture is a hard thing to buck up against when it's you're just one person. I would try and find maybe see what allies you can make in your company. Try and find that. Obviously, we're working from home, so it's a little bit difficult, but I've been in situations like that before, and probably my honest opinion is there's a lot of great companies out there that would be happy to have you. So don't stay in a situation where you're not treated well. Like life's too short. I wouldn't put up with that. So be straight up with someone, and then if you have the right skills, just network with people and get the hell out of there.
Yeah. Another question is, how do you catch yourself falling into a negative or toxic emotions when feeling stressed?
How do you catch it?
Yeah, I
So
think,
I
yeah,
think,
like how do you, yeah, she
how
said,
do you
how do
like notice it?
yeah, I think so.
Okay, I'll try for that. Yeah, so I think like that's a very important disclaimer for like what I'm talking about is like I still get stressed out all the time. It's just not as bad, and I can handle it a lot more now. Um, but I'd say like the more aware of things you are, so like if a simple exercise is if you just get a piece of paper and put it at your desk and write down like what time it is. I think like mood journaling is something that I haven't done it personally, but I've heard that's pretty effective. Of you can kind of keep a baseline of how you're doing day to day, and then you might be able to. You're basically making data points on maybe it's when you have a certain meeting that you start to get more stressed out. When you're working on if you feel yourself sliding into a negative state, like overall, it's always really, they're easy to get into, but very tough to get out of. One technique I've heard of is if you're feeling really negative, a good way is try and visualize a really positive thing that you went through. And it sounds super hokey, but it can be very effective. And also the other thing too is like try and do things that you like. Like, if you're having a tough day, like develop a couple things. Like I love working out or stuff like that, and watching comedy. So find those things that might kind of get you out of it. But just the more it's good that you're aware of it, because then you can attack it a little bit more.
Great. We have a question that says, my team is incredibly stressed and overworked, especially with recent layoffs. And no matter how much I ask them to take care of themselves and rest, it's still seeming like they're pushing themselves too hard. How can I help them?
Yeah, that's really tough. Like I had gone through something similar last year where staff it like we stopped all hiring. Things were really tight for a couple months. As a leader, what I tried to do is just take whatever I can off my team's plate and kind of eat that stress myself, which that has its own negative effects to it. But I think especially with CES, like we under show the value that we bring to organizations. So like the more if you can start to make that business case of like where obviously if you're a SaaS company and you're billing every single year or month, like the more customers you retain, if you can really show, like that's what I was able to do is, a lot of our customers, a lot of our revenue comes from existing customers. So that made it easier for me to get that kind of stake for the team. But immediately, like I've heard good things like, not doing any Zoom meetings on Friday, which isn't realistic for everyone. But, I'd say, the best way to help your team is just let them know that you're in it there with them. Like I've been in difficult situations, but I had a boss one time who was like, I'd never ask you to do something I wouldn't do myself. So if I'm working with someone who's, right there beside me, I'm cool with it. Whereas if someone's, sitting up top, putting the whip down, it's not the same.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Let's see, we have time for maybe just one last question. Um, and the question is, I'm a new customer success manager and I find having difficult conversations with customers stressful. Any way to help me get more comfortable with that?
Yeah, so another book recommendation that's really good is called Crucial Conversations. That's where I got some of the material for dealing with conflict. I would say that's probably a good thing to read up. And I don't have some crazy strategy. Like what I do with any weakness I have or thing that I want to get better on, I just go to Google and YouTube and just check out anything I can and try and get better at it. But I think like if you're brand new to customer success or really any profession, it's going to suck at first and it's not going to be comfortable, but you'll be shocked where you come if you keep sticking to it and practicing. That can get a little easier. But another good thing that, as you're getting new is role play really difficult calls. So, you sit down with your boss and then, have them be a jerk, which I'm sure they'll be happy to do. And it should be fairly easy to like get yourself a little bit comfortable. So it's almost like immersion therapy where you're, thinking about a difficult thing, having it as a test run and actually doing it. But, customers, it's still challenging sometimes.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ryan, and thank you everyone who joined us today. At the end of this webinar, a brief survey would pop up, and we would appreciate your feedback on our webinar programming so we continue to bring you great content that you guys are looking for. Again, everyone have a great rest of your day, and thanks again, Ryan.
Thanks so much. Have a good one, everyone.